Whatever questions you have, I will be happy to answer any question that I can answer. If I don't have the answer, I'll tell you I don't have the answer and I don't know. If it requires an answer that's sensitive or that would cause me to violate my NDA, I'll tell you that and I won't be able to answer it. But at least you'll hear it from me. And I will tell you that I can't answer the question and you'll know why.
Lou,
Sure.
You're up, buddy. I can't wait to hear everything you have to say. I'm going to shut up.
I'd rather this be a discussion if possible, and kind of make it interactive. And then at the end, any questions you have, let me know. A couple ground rules. There are no ground rules. Whatever questions you have, I will be happy to answer any question that I can answer. If I don't have the answer, I'll tell you I don't have the answer and I don't know. If it requires an answer that's sensitive or that would cause me to violate my NDA, I'll tell you that and I won't be able to answer it. But at least you'll hear it from me and I will tell you that I can't answer the question and you'll know why. I want to be as transparent and forthcoming as possible. Also, before I begin, I would like to also extend a few thank yous to a couple folks here. First of all, Mr. Rich Hoffman, I thank you for inviting us. I want to let everybody know here that this is important to folks like Hal and I. We do not get a speaking engagement fee to do this. We do this free because we believe in what we're doing, because we know you believe in what you're doing. So I want to make sure that's clear. I also want to thank Mr. Robert Powell. Thank you very much, sir, for all the coordination and everything, all your help so far. It's been fantastic. Thank you. Also Mr. Morgan Bell. So thank you very much. Mr. Joe Donato. And by the way, please give Angie my regards. She was a fantastic agent, and I'm sure she's a fantastic officer now. And then I would also like to thank Mr. Alejandro Rojas and his very lovely wife over here. These folks are kind of the mavericks in their field, and despite, until recently, a lot of the stigma that you all know surround this portfolio, they continue to do their jobs day in and day out, and that says a lot. I would also like to just a quick show of hands, if you're comfortable, those who have ever served either in the military or worked with the U.S. government or are working with the U.S. government in any capacity at all. Anybody at all. Quite a few people. I want to thank you sincerely for your service. It is truly humbling. Thank you so very much. And then, of course, last but not least, an individual who I did not know. I only heard about her today. I do apologize for my ignorance, but it is the passing of Miss Karen King. That is certainly very unfortunate and sad news to hear, and especially for somebody who had contributed much to this field. So I would like to also offer my condolences sincerely to her family. Unfortunately, she on her passing. So before I change any slides here, I would also like to thank you all. Last but not least, certainly but not least, you're really the reason why we're here. Folks like Hal, myself, others, because you all have been pursuing something that I only did for the last decade. Some of you have invested 30, 40, even 50 years of your life. And that is one hell of a commitment. That is a marriage. So I want to tell you sincerely from myself and from Hal and others, thank you very much for your commitment. And I'm very hopeful that forums like this are going to continue to bring this conversation to light. So with no further ado, let me go ahead and see if I figured this out. I have to preface this. Hooked on Phonics did not work for me too well. I'm kind of limited from an automation perspective, so let's see if it works. It works.
It worked.
Okay. A lot of people ask me, so Lou, do you think disclosure has occurred? And I think it has occurred, and I think it is still occurring. As I said before, I believe this is a process, it's not an event. I'm also asked, well, is this confirmation? Well, What does that mean? Because if you look at the word confirmation, that kind of gives the impression that there's some sort of underlying narrative to begin with that you're confirming. And I'm not sure we have that narrative yet. I think we need more data. I think we're in the process of building that narrative, and we do that through using the scientific method and collecting evidence and materials and doing the proper analysis on this in a way that can be peer reviewed and of course repeatable, right? That's what science is all about. So is this confirmation? In my opinion, and I'm going to caveat that it's only my opinion, I don't like to give it very often, I don't think this is confirmation, because I don't think we have a narrative yet. And I'm very wary of going down any avenue where we have some preconceived notion of what something might or might not be already, until we have enough evidence to establish the facts. So December 16th, you all know better than I do what happened. The news got out, and everybody was talking about it. I would like to share with you some personal insight. I received a call from a very dear colleague of mine who's still at the Pentagon, who works this effort very, very closely. And so yes, read between the lines. When I say is working this, I don't mean in the past. Actively working this. So that means this effort continues. So congratulations, it's still going. And that too will come out, hopefully in a very official way sometime soon. But I received a call from him very, very recently, actually it was this week, and he said, you know, Lou, it's funny because a conversation that I had to have with you just a year and a half ago in a vault within a skiff in a TSSCI facility that SAP cleared, and we had to whisper to have this conversation, I can now have this conversation in the open halls of the Pentagon. Imagine that, how far we've come. And so as we sit here today, I encourage you, look around, look at all these pictures around you. You're right now at the epicenter of where mankind, as a species, left this planet and went somewhere else, went to the moon. I was looking at some of these pictures, they're profound. In one picture, you have a dirt road with a few Model Ts and people walking along a dusty road. Just 40 years later, you have someone also walking on a dusty road, but it's not on this planet, it's on the moon. And he's in a spacesuit. So things happen, and because of people like you in the scientific community, science fiction becomes science fact. And so anybody who would look at you with some sort of maybe tilted smile or something like that and say, oh, you talk about UFOs, what does that mean? Well, we don't know what it means, but you should probably pay attention because it is real. Now, what it is and how, what its intentions, all these other things, well, that's for smarter people than me to figure out. That's beyond me. But we have established the fact that they're real. And we have also established the fact that from a national security perspective, and we'll talk about this, I know some people are a little bit leery of the fact that I've always historically tied this to a national security threat, and we'll get to that. But you now have people at the highest levels of the United States government and international communities of their governments finally taking this serious, applying real resources, real talent, real expertise to look at this and finally figure out what this means. So congratulations. I think this is a historic event for everybody. To have a forum like this where everybody can sit down and have an honest conversation about a topic that has been so fraught before with skepticism and taboo, you've achieved a lot. Keep in mind, just 10 years ago, scientists still couldn't agree whether or not the giant squid of the Pacific really even existed, because no one saw one on camera. Until finally, enough washed up on a beach and enough showed up on deep sea cameras where now we realize, oh, you know what? There really are sea monsters in the ocean, but they're actually a species. It's actually part of nature. It's not pseudoscience, it's just science. And so my time at the Pentagon, working with some fantastic human beings like Hal Puthoff and others, we approach this very much the same way. We approach this from a scientific perspective. We wanted to know what we could capture with empirical data, qualify it and quantify it, so then we can go ahead and take that data and try to figure out what it is we're dealing with. And so that's really it in a nutshell. This occurred, and my intention for leaving the Department of Defense, I would also like to clarify, it was not a matter of disloyalty. It was in fact loyalty why I left the Department of Defense in the first place. I am very, very loyal to the Department of Defense. If you look at my resignation memo, one of the very last things I told Secretary Mattis, you can always count on me to carry the water for DOD. I love my country. I love the Department of Defense. I believe in what we're trying to accomplish. But in order for me to accomplish and finish the very mission I was given, by the way, which I did not ask for, I actually had to leave my beloved department to finish that mission. So if anybody has any speculation out there why I left, I did not leave in bad blood. I left because I had to, because it was the only way I was going to be able to get the boss who I was loyal to, who I served in combat with, to be able to pay attention, because certain people that were minding him were not providing him the information. And in my opinion, the only thing more dangerous to a country, keep in mind that Department of Defense mission is to protect its national borders, the only thing more dangerous than our ability not to protect our national borders and our people is not to be able to have a conversation that threat exists. And that is what I objected to. We couldn't even have a conversation about it because of social stigma, and that is wrong. So that is why I chose to leave. And of course, a lot of speculation came out as a result of that. Am I a spy for the CIA trying to fool people and do soft disclosure? As I've said before, look, at the end of the day, I'll tell you no, but it doesn't really matter because people are going to believe what they believe. At the end of the day, who cares? Because we're getting what we wanted. You're getting the information that was so squirreled away in these little secret hidden compartments, it's now coming to light. You're now realizing we were looking at aircraft 40 years in the future. Because if you look at 40 years ago in the past, what did we have? We had F-16s, we had F-14 Tomcats, we had F-4s. What do we have today? We have F-18s, we have F-16s, we have F-22s, we have F-117s, but they're still jets. When you look at the DIA studies, I think it's very evident what we were looking at. We weren't looking at aircraft 40 years in the future. We're going to get into a little of that right now. So this was the AATIP contract focus. And I also want to go a little bit into what AATIP means. And you see it up here, aerospace. We're not talking about aviation. We're not talking about airplanes. We're talking about things that have the ability to operate both in an atmosphere environment and no atmosphere environment. And you know what? Probably underwater too. Why is that important? Because these things are being able to perform in a way that we still don't quite yet understand, and we certainly cannot replicate. More importantly, they can do it in all virtual mediums. So let me digress for just one moment here and do a very brief, and I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence. I know pretty much everybody in this room knows more about physics than I do. But as it was explained to me, let's say this pen here is an aircraft. An aircraft looks like an aircraft because it has to perform in our atmosphere. So it has a nose, it's got a tail, it's got wings, it's got control surfaces, it's got an engine in the back. So a plane pretty much looks like a plane. Yeah, it might be a B-2 versus an F-16, but it still is a plane. Whereas a rocket doesn't have to fly really for very much time in our atmosphere. It's in no atmosphere. So it has thrusters, doesn't have wings, doesn't have control surfaces, has thrusters, has chemical rocket motors instead of a jet engine, because there's no atmosphere. And yet a submarine looks completely different. It actually uses buoyancy and a propeller to move underwater. And that's why a submarine looks like a submarine, a plane looks like a plane, and a rocket looks like a rocket, for the most part. Yet these things we're seeing can operate in all these environments without changing their physical attributes and still continue to perform the same way. Now, for those of you who are scientists, you know the drag coefficients we're talking about when you're in water. When you look at a torpedo, and I can't go into details here, but anything above a moderate speed underwater, the drag becomes so significant that it's almost impossible to overcome unless you use other technologies to reduce that friction, okay? And yet these things can perform just as easy. We pick them up on radar, we pick them up on sonar, and we pick them up with everything in between. This was a contract focus. I've talked about this before, but this came out back more than a year ago, before the list of DIA studies was ever released. And this is actual from the contract. Why is that important? Because the word phenomena is used. It doesn't say aircraft, folks. It says phenomena. It's in black and white. You can read it yourself in the contract. Black and white. Every word that we use is deliberate in the US government. You know that from a contract vehicle perspective. If you've ever been a Corps, contract officer's representative, you know what I'm talking about. Words have meaning. They have legal meaning. So when you see that, investigate legitimacy of currently observed phenomena. Investigate. That doesn't mean just do studies, folks. That doesn't mean sit back with a stubby pencil and just collect data. It's investigate. It's doing. It's an action. So, and then ask the question, are they achievable by current understanding of physics and engineering? Well, if they're aircraft, then the answer is yes. Unless they're not. And then it says at the bottom, if not, what research is required to achieve it? Well, those are the studies that Mr. Putov helped get done for us. And several other very, very, very renowned scientists. Some of the best in the world in their fields, mind you. So that's why you have those studies that came out. And again, it says in black and white, phenomena. Does not say aircraft. So anybody who tries to twist that narrative, I would encourage you to do a little reading, or encourage them to do a little reading, because it's in black and white. So this is a slide I've put out before, but I can probably talk a little bit more now about it because all these studies came out. So let me briefly go over what the 5 observables were. Okay, you're talking about an object. Here's our little airplane again. The first observable is sudden and instantaneous acceleration. What we're talking about are the inertial forces that are exhibited by something when it changes direction from point A to point B and possibly back to A again or C or whatever. There are internal inertial forces that we can look at and we can actually measure to determine, is this something that we know of? So to put this in context, the human body can withstand for a very short period of time, about 9 Gs, wearing a G suit. Otherwise, very unpleasant things start to happen. Blackouts, redouts, etc. An F-16, albeit a little bit older aircraft. Anybody here from General Dynamics? Well, anyways, great aircraft. A little older, still one of the most highly maneuverable aircraft we've ever built, except a few experimental ones, but they were unmanned. So, and that aircraft can go anywhere between 16 to 18 Gs before the material science aspect of the aircraft begins to break down, meaning wings snap off, okay? There are other things, missiles, that can experience much greater G-forces for a very short period of time. Again, a very short period of time. But what we're seeing is a consistent and a persistent ability to perform G-forces well in excess of 400 Gs. And that's on the conservative side, well beyond the healthy limitations of anything biologically certain to withstand. And by the way, this is not world according to Lou. This is actually documented, it's been recorded, it's real, you can see it yourself. And the Nimitz is just one of many, many examples that I'm fairly certain are going to come to light really soon. The next one is hypersonic velocity. So here's our little airplane again flying in the atmosphere. And everybody knows what supersonic speeds are, but when you're talking hypersonic velocity, you're talking about Mach 5 plus. That's really fast, folks. Now, do we have aircraft that can do it? Sure. Heck, the space shuttle did it when it was achieving orbital velocity. But not the way we're seeing it, and certainly not without the associated signatures. When you see the shuttle launch, baby, you know it's the shuttle. I mean, it's loud. You see a smoke plume for miles and miles and miles. The earth shakes. When an aircraft is doing that kind of speed, or a missile, you have heat ablation and friction. You have atmospheric ionization. You have contrails out the back. You have acoustic signatures, such as sonic booms, that are very hard to get around and engineer around it. Okay? That's why you have something like the B-2. It's really stealthy, but it's not really fast. If you want to be really fast, you're probably not going to be really stealthy. So it's a trade-off. Yet these things are performing hypersonic velocity in some cases. I have to be careful what I say. What I will tell you is that they have been officially clocked at over 13,000 miles an hour. Unofficially, much, much faster. And by the way, these are through military capabilities, okay? Not grandma saw some lights in the backyard. The third observable is a little bit of an oxymoron, low observability, right? Well, how the hell is that an observable? Well, it is, believe it or not. The fact that you can't see it sometimes is something that you can record. Sometimes the absence of data itself is just as important as having data. If you see a hole in a picture, that means something's creating that hole. And very much the same way here. You'll have the reports of the pilots, eyewitnesses, by the way, highly trained observers, all with top secret security clearances, by the way, trusted to fly live munitions over US cities, go and fight and win wars already have. These people are trained to know the silhouette between a MiG-25, a MiG-29, an F-16, and a European Tornado. They know it. They know the difference between a drone, a quadcopter, and a kite. And they're telling you what they're seeing is unlike anything they've ever seen before. But oh wait, there's more. Because what they're reporting and saying, you know, it's this weird kind of silvery object that's hard to see, is also being backed up by the electro-optical data. The cameras are seeing that same fuzzy weird object too, with this weird glowing aura, this halo around it. And oh, by the way, it happens to be the same thing that the radar is picking up too, simultaneously. And not just one radar, many radars at the same time from different positions. Okay? So they have spatial and temporal data coming in. Oh, I think we had a problem. I told you guys I'm never good at this. Oh, came back on again. Look at that. Okay. So you have spatial and temporal information all now coming together, telling you that you got something there. You may not know what it is. It's kind of hard to see it. But maybe the fact that it's hard to see in itself isn't observable. Maybe it's telling you something. There's some physics there, right? When you look at the desert, a hot desert on a hot day, you see that mirage effect. It's kind of hard to see through. Are we looking at something similar? And of course, as you can see on the right, these are some of the reasons why it's important for us from a DoD perspective, a military perspective, a national security perspective. Because if I can do instantaneous acceleration and hypersonic velocity and low observability, that gives me the ability to understand thrust vectoring capabilities, G-force neutralization, rapid deployment of a capability, first strike capability, right? So if I can go ahead and hit my enemy before they hit me, then that's probably better. And then of course, stealth, low observability. The other two observables, multi-medium travel and positive lift, we'll talk very briefly about that too. I apologize on the right if it's hard to see those. I didn't get a chance when I was going between PC and Mac and back and forth on this. It dropped the color, but those are supposed to be yellow. Multi-medium travel, we talked briefly about that. An object that can perform just as easily in atmosphere, low Earth orbit, possibly beyond, and even underwater. Now, why would that be important for us? Well, strategic surprise. Military flexibility, battle space dominance. I can fly, I can swim, and I can do everything in between. That's huge. But that again goes to a world of compromises. When we're talking from an engineering perspective, for example, when you look at a seaplane, right? That's a plane that can fly, but it can also kind of be like a boat. But a seaplane isn't real. It's an amalgamation of compromises. It's not really a great airplane, and it's not really a great boat. It's just kind of in the middle there because it's got to satisfy both. So there are these compromises. We don't see those compromises when we're looking at the UAP. Why is that? And then of course, positive lift. The ability to defy the natural effects of Earth's gravitational force. That, by the way, universally applies to us all. Now, do we have technology? Sure. I mean, we have hot air balloons. That's positive lift. We have lift, wings, right? Like an aircraft. You have the four coefficients you have to pay attention to. Thrust, lift, drag, weight. You have a jet engine that can provide that thrust. You have a propeller engine that's kind of a mechanical way of pushing the air, if you will. And then you have rocket engines, chemical engines. But really, those are only the four real ways we know how to defy, for any real period of time, Earth's natural gravitational force, other than ballistic, right? Like a mortar or just popping a missile out out of a silo. Yet these things can fly at these incredible speeds and yet hover like a helicopter. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. They can drop in from 80,000 feet down to 50 feet right over the water within less than a couple seconds. 2 seconds. You tell me, and I was part of a lot of government programs. I have a good, healthy background in aerospace and protecting technologies, advanced technologies when I was a young special agent. We still don't have that capability. So you can see from a national security perspective, there are national security implications to this. Now, if you ask me as a human being, is it a national security threat? I think my answer to you would be, it could be if it wanted to be. It has the potential to be. I'm not saying they're a threat. What I'm saying is that they could be if they wanted to be. Or it could be if it wanted to be. So as a result, you pay your Department of Defense to protect this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's what it says. So you want a Department of Defense to consider this a potential national security threat until it can prove it's not. So that's why in my job, look, if this was a humanitarian thing and everybody was here for peace and sing kumbaya, give it to the State Department, give it to an NGO, give it to USAID. That's not DOD's job. DOD's job is to go fight and win wars quickly. That is what you pay us to do. And so that is why there was a national security nexus. Because if it was anything other than national security, the DOD would not be involved. The Air Force wouldn't be involved, Navy wouldn't be involved, most likely CIA wouldn't be involved, DIA and everybody else. It is a national security issue. Is it a threat? I don't know. But it is an issue, in my opinion. Okay, next one. But you know what? This effort didn't start with AATIP. And I know that. And you know that. AATIP was just one piece in a long legacy of efforts that some people in this room were actually part of. How incredible is that, right? So here we are today, and we're going all the way back. Some folks in this room were actually part of Project Blue Book. Isn't that something else? And here we are. These are documents that were actually released by these organizations that talk about the same 5 observables. In fact, going back to the 1950s, early 50s, 1952 to be precise, officers described seeing a flying white butane tank about 40 feet. A flying lozenge. What does that sound like to you? Sounds like a Tic Tac to me. And these observables go all the way back to 1947. And they're written in some cases by 4-star officers. They're written to and from J. Edgar Hoover, as high as it gets. So don't look at AATIP and say, well, AATIP brought all this out. Actually, we didn't. We just continued the legacy of a lot of hard work. It goes well before that. We have known about these things for a long time. The only thing AATIP did with the help of folks like Hal was be able to understand that these things fell into a category of observables that then allowed us to try to figure out the physics. That is an accomplishment of AATIP. Unfortunately, I can't take credit for it. The credit goes to that guy. But that is something that this office was able to achieve. And I do think that's significant. Because once you understand the physics, you understand how it works. And if you understand how it works, then maybe you can replicate it. So I encourage you at some time to take a look at some of these documents. Very, very interesting. Again, a lot of these are the recent FOIA. There's a lot of them. I don't expect everybody to digest all of it. But there's enough there where anybody can look at these, or even take these slides and blow up and see some of these examples. They're pretty incredible. I'm sure some of you will do this anyway. So everybody always takes these briefings. They go through a fine-tooth comb. So I try to put a couple Easter eggs in there once in a while. So people, you know. I shouldn't have said that, but it's true. So there's a long history, but you know what? It's not only the U.S., folks. It's foreign governments. They've got an interest too. And some of these countries have actually admitted it. For some reason, they're a little more forthcoming than we are. I don't know why. I can only imagine why. But these are some of the organizations that are actually within their governments that are actually chartered specifically to look at UAPs from a scientific perspective, mind you. So you're talking about money, resources, and budgets and personnel that could be diverted to things like war on terrorism, but they're not. They're diverted to the UAP phenomenon because they think it's important enough that they understand what they're dealing with. And frankly, I don't blame them. But guess what? It's not just them. Here's some more countries. So I think when we have this conversation, we're beginning to realize that this is not a US phenomenon. This is not even a phenomenon for this hemisphere. It is truly a global phenomenon. There's a gentleman I met here from Peru. And you know what? They had one hell of an effort. A lot of interesting things happen in South America. Hal and I have had a debriefing with one individual in particular from a country down south, a very senior person. I still remember that debriefing. Very, very compelling. And it was an official US government debriefing, by the way. So yeah, there's a history here, and this is a global phenomenon. So why wouldn't we look at it? I mean, our friends are looking at it. Some of our foreign adversaries are looking at it. Sure, you should look at it. Now, there's two things I'd like to before we go to the next slide, talk about just briefly. National security threat. I heard someone else say this far more eloquently, but let me see if I can recapture it very quickly. Hypothetically, sir, Senator so-and-so. Lou, do you think this is really, really, at the end of the day, is this really a threat? Well, sir, Mr. Senator, we have two options. A, we have something coming into our airspace that we have no idea what it is, how it works, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it. And oh, by the way, it has a capability to bring potentially nuclear capabilities over the White House in 2 minutes. Or it's a mass delusion. Everybody is absolutely crazy. Thousands of DoD people who have top secret clearances, trained observers who you trust to go fight and win wars with live munitions over US cities. They're crazy. By the way, some of these people have their finger on the nuclear button. Is that not also an issue? So either way, it's a national security issue. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. It is a national security issue. Those are the only two options. It's real or it's not. Neither one is a national security issue. So I think it's important we look at it that way. And so then the next option is, well, Lou, it's I won't say who, the DoD scratches their head and says, well, actually, we think it's Russian. Well, okay, fine. You know what? Great. So how long have you known DoD that this was a Russian capability and you failed to inform Congress, which, by the way, is law? What's your answer now? Because, okay, great, it's Russian. Why haven't you told me? It's been how many years? And they've had this capability the entire time? So, you see my point here. When you go down the logic train, it's really not that illogical to have this conversation from a national security perspective. Because either way you look at it, it is a national security issue. But with come challenges, also come opportunities. We are in a room now where we have some of the greatest minds in this country working together to put human beings on the moon. Coming in today, this morning, I was stunned to see a life-size version of the Saturn V rocket. Amazing. Amazing. One of the most powerful, fastest machines mankind has ever built, ever, is standing right over there, right in your backyard, right? And let's look at it. What happened during the last space race? A lot of things happened. A lot of industries came out of the last space race that we couldn't even imagine. So my humble company, along with Hal and several other people like Chris Mellon, Steve Justice, we have a company that a lot of people kind of say, well, all right, Lou, hold on. You ran AATIP, but now you're doing this thing with GTSA. And, okay, you're trying to build something, you're trying to study something, you're also selling books and t-shirts, and I'm confused. Okay, well, it's okay, you can be, but it actually makes sense. But that's a whole other briefing. But what I'm here to tell you, these are kind of the three divisions we have. Field operations, science and aerospace, and education and entertainment. Now what the hell does entertainment and a rock star have to do with this? You got a platform, folks. Same reason you're here today. You're all coming here to have a discussion and have a conversation. And in order to do that, you got to get the word out. Having a rock star and a musician who understands how to push a message and is a little bit of a vanguard and maverick and doesn't really care about breaking some of the rules that guys like me do worry about, sometimes you got to break a little China. And he knows how to break a lot of China. He is also an individual who got to the highest levels of government, whether you want to admit it or not. He got to Podesta. Okay. So we have to give credit where credit is due. And part of this is like when Spielberg came out with his Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that was, I think we can look back and say, wow, that was actually a very monumental movie. It was done for entertainment, but it was a monumental movie. And so there are examples where science fiction has actually informed science fact, and science fact has informed science fiction, and that's done in entertainment. Let's put an example. Gene Roddenberry, Star Trek, right? Remember they had a little tricorder and a little flip phone, and all of a sudden Motorola 30 years later we all got flip phones, right? They talk about the tricorder, kind of this thing that we're gonna look inside your body. Now we've got CAT scans. So those are some examples where science fiction helped inform science fact. But let's look at some examples where science fact informs science fiction in the entertainment industry. And then I won't beat this horse to death too much. Apollo 13, a mission that almost became a national tragedy and disaster. But it wasn't. It was a miracle. And 30 years later, you have Hollywood doing a movie with Ron Howard as director on Apollo 13, right? To get that message out. So no different than anybody else trying to get their message out, no different than this organization. Here, we're trying to get the conversation started. And what you saw on History Channel, that is a start. You're talking about a global audience of millions and millions of people where we can finally have the conversation. And by the way, what people say on camera, you can't take it back. Once it's said, once it's recorded, it's there for posterity forever. So this is a way that we can have that conversation. And we can get people to have the conversation. People with access, people with expertise, people in the government. This is not a show. And by the way, if anybody wants to know how well you do financially doing a show after 7 months like this, traveling the world internationally and working your butt off, I've made enough, just so everyone's put it on the table, I made enough to buy a decent lawnmower. That's how much money I have. So I can now mow my lawn on a self-propelled lawnmower. So if you think this is some get-rich-quick scheme, it's not, folks. Go play the lottery. You got better chances of making more money doing that. You do this because you believe in it, and once you see it, you can't forget it. So this is our humble company. We talked about some of the innovations that came out. Profound innovations resulted from the last space race. Well, let's take a look at a few of them. Portable life support systems, micro scanners, remote medical monitoring and sensors, memory foam for beds. Here's just a small few examples. Let's look at a few more. Cosmic ray shielding, we now use them on our satellites. Freeze-dried food. I'm not sure that was such a great innovation. Portable soil vacuum, reflective foils we use now for thermal insulation. This goes on, right? Human prosthetics, and thank NASA. Actually, there were over 6,300 innovations. Any of you have athletic shoes and go work out or do yoga? Apollo. Any of you had a CAT scan in the last year? Apollo. LED lights. Anybody who has ever seen an LED light or uses LED lights to try to save money in your house? Apollo. Okay. Each one of these, in some cases, turned out to be multi-billion-dollar industries, and they had no idea, NASA had no idea what was going to come out of the space race. And here's just a few small examples. So guess what? In my opinion, I think we're at that paradigm again. I think we are at this paradigm where now we are faced with a new reality. And So the sky's the limit, folks. If you think that's exciting, wait till you see what comes out of this. When you can manipulate space-time metric, can you imagine what type of things we can do for mankind and humanity? And that's just one. So our company is focused to a great deal on the science piece and the aerospace, on looking at this as a business case model that might work. All right, so here's a slide that everybody wants to talk about and see. So there you go. No, I'm kidding.
He's a tease.
Look, all those products that came out of the last space race required material science. Scientists, in some cases, like you that are sitting in this room, we need your help. You don't have the material, you don't have the analysis, you don't have the data, you got nothing. So this is why forums like yours are so important. You gotta have scientists at the end of the day to figure out just what the hell it is we're looking at. What makes this material so special? Now, in some cases, this material was told it's special. Through analysis, guess what? Not so special. But some of it is absolutely special. I won't point out which ones on that slide, but there are some that are absolutely special and have been briefed to some very, very senior levels of this government. And they do remarkable and extraordinary things, and they're built in such a way that to this day we still can't replicate it. To this day. So that should be very telling. Material science is a critical piece to this. We can't just sit there and say, aha, I told you so. That's not what this is about. This effort is not about satisfying the natural curiosity of people who want to know right now. As I've said before, there's a difference in giving information right and giving it right now. I am not in the business of giving information right now. I'd rather give it to you right. So you have to do due diligence. You have to understand what it takes to do the analysis and to respect the scientific methods and to respect the people you're working with in government, whether it be the legislative branch or the executive branch. You have to give people time. You have been steeped, many of you, in this for decades. Some of these people are learning about this for the very first time, no kidding. They scratch their head and say, wait a minute, that's real? That's real. Can you imagine that? So you gotta give them time, and then they have to make decisions. Because you can imagine with something like this, there's all sorts of agencies and organizations that have an interest in this. I can't tell you which ones, unfortunately, but you can use your imagination. And it's not just propulsion. There's other organizations that can look at this, and say, let's say from an armor perspective, right? I put X amount of pounds of armor on a vehicle that slow me down and weigh me down. What if I didn't have to have armor at all? What if I had a way with certain material where bullets didn't matter anymore? It didn't do anything to me. So we're taking this step by step. I know people are hungry for information and data. I do believe it's forthcoming, but it has to be done the right way. And by the way, let me caveat that too, because people say, well, it's the right way your way? No, it's not my way. It's not my way at all. But we have to respect the people that are involved. We have to give them the flexibility and latitude to take this in and start making the right decisions. And you want to always make sure that your executive branch and your legislative branch are duly informed. You don't want one being informed and not the other. Politics aside, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Tea Party, don't care. The bottom line is when you serve as a government servant like I did, it is our duty and responsibility to inform leadership and the executive branch. Doesn't matter who's in charge. And in turn, you also have to make sure that the legislative branch is also informed. And you don't want one being more informed than the other, because then they get mad. So it takes time. It takes time. But now let's recap very quickly the last year and 4 months. Okay? Just very quickly. Humor me for one moment. The New York Times came out and published a story that the program was real. DoD admitted it was real. They said they spent $22 million on it. 3 videos for the first time in U.S. government history were released by the U.S. government through the actual review process on objects that they still say to this day they have no idea what they are. By the way, they were already analyzed. So please don't show me some sort of video game that someone pulled off their PC and say, look, that's IR flare. That's not even a real picture. You're looking at a video game, okay? Give me real data. We had the best of the best from the intelligence community looking at this that briefed me, and they said, Lou, we haven't a clue. This is some weird stuff. And by the way, you will see that we even had people from NTSB on camera analyze it. On camera. Same thing. Bingo. Not a clue. 50 years of doing investigations for the NTSB. I've never seen anything like that in my career. For the record, on camera. So, I think it's important as we build a compelling case that we can tell, keeping in mind that even the brief I'm giving you today, there are going to be people, maybe even in this audience, but there are going to be people, if this goes out, that are going to scrutinize every single word I say. And they're waiting for me to mess up. One wrong word that violates my NDA and I go to jail. You won't see Lou for a very long time. So I have to be careful. I will not violate my NDA, not because I'm afraid of jail, just because I'm a patriot. I don't know what to tell you. I love my country, so I'm not going to violate it. But I am going to try to have a conversation in a way that gets everybody involved, and that information comes to you the right way. Because it shouldn't be coming from Luis Elizondo. It shouldn't be coming World According to Lou, and this is everything, just blah. It should be coming through the government channels, the right channels, because ultimately that's why I really left the Department of Defense. I wanted to fix it. I didn't want to ruin it. These are good people. Most of those people there are my friends or foxhole buddies in combat with. They're good, they're loyal, they're patriots. Yeah, there's dysfunction in the government. I got it, we all know it, it's there. But there's also a lot of goodness. And so I wanted to compel those in leadership positions to fix the system. It's not any one individual's fault. Now, are there little cabals in there that made my life very difficult? Yeah, absolutely there were. And that's another conversation. But they did not represent the government writ large. And I think it's important that I make that distinction. And I want the government to work to our benefit. Now, I'm a private citizen. Before, I was a servant of the people. Now the government serves me. And I want to make sure it works. I want to make sure it's fixed. And so that's what we're doing. So that's really what my effort has been the last year and a half. And so if we've been a little bit radio silence, I apologize for that. It's not intentional, but there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. Just because you don't see what's on top of the water, there's a whole lot going on underneath. So I ask for a little bit of patience and understanding, which you've all been very patient and understanding. I think good things are coming. I think good things are coming this way. Yeah, they're going to be a little scary for some people. And maybe this is a conversation that is not only involving scientists like you and the curious, but also maybe religious scholars and philosophers and government people and academics, right? Why not bring them into the mix? Because at the end of the day, I don't care if you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're a cop, you're a fireman, you're a school teacher, you're a student. This phenomena affects every single one of us equally. And how we interpret this information may differ depending where you come from and what your view on is in life. But at the end of the day, we're all affected equally. So we should probably all have a conversation together, in my opinion, anyways. So, with that said, let me go here. And before we go to questions real quick, I would like to just point out one last thing. I was a government bureaucrat. I did some stuff before in the intelligence community. I spent some time in some really bad situations overseas. But when I came into this program, I didn't ask to it. It was someone asked me, because of my background in counterintelligence, to take the job. And so I did it. This is not something that I went to, yeah, I want to do it. When they came to me and they finally had a serious conversation, they asked me, said, Lou, I want to know, what do you think about UFOs? I told them I don't. Don't think about it. Don't know, don't care. I don't got time, I don't have a page, I'm worried about the enemy. Tell me where the enemy is and we'll go get him. And so that's probably why I was brought on in the beginning. And then later, the director who preceded me, unfortunately was run out of the US government because of this very caustic portfolio, a lot of stigma. And so people like Hal and others who we had to rely upon after that director and I took it over, they're the real heroes of this scenario. I was just kind of the guy that could kind of keep everybody protected and keep it running, but at the end of the day, they were the ones doing the hard work. So if there's anybody to thank in this scenario, there's a handful of people. My former director, I can't say his name because I promised I would never. He has to make that decision if he wants to come out, but he's certainly one of those heroes. Hal Pudoff is certainly one of those heroes. Another guy named Kit Green is one of those heroes. Another guy that I can't mention his name is one of those heroes because he is still fighting the fight in Washington right now, today, like this moment, running parts of this program. So that's encouraging. It's alive and well. Now, is it called AATIP? I don't know. I'd probably change the name, frankly. But other than that, it's the same thing. It's exactly the same vehicle. You can call it a Lincoln or a Ford. It's made in the same plant, the same car, different badge. So anyways, with that, what I'd like to do, if it's okay, turn it over to some questions, because I know you probably have more specific questions, and I can't anticipate what those are, so I'm going to shut up and see if anybody has any questions.
So, have a seat, sir. Let's you sit down and relax for a second if you can. You know, oh my God, I'm getting a lot of questions. So, okay, let's just go right through this. I have the questions for him, and let this poor gentleman sit down. He has just been through the mill in terms of flights and everything else. So, I've been looking at a lot of these questions, and some of them are very excellent. Let me tell you, and they're keep coming in. And this one's a book. So, how do you explain, sir, that senior journalists have not followed up on the information released to the New York Times?
I think it's the same reason why scientists have it, stigma. It's a career killer. Now, it's changing, but I think it was a career killer. And I think people like Alejandro Rojas can tell you firsthand some of the challenges he had to endure. I will tell you, I know from personal experience, he's a very, very respectable investigative journalist. It just so happens that what he's interested in happens to be aerophenomena. And for that reason, people will look at it as, oh, is this up? Okay.
They're not hearing you too much.
Got it.
So,
You don't have to stand up, just talk.
No, I'll stand up. That's okay. Never mind. No big deal. Can you folks hear me in the back now? Okay. Okay. How about now? Can you hear me now? Louder? Okay. How about that? All right. I don't want to blast the eardrums here in the front, but there you go. So, did you hear the question initially? Why certain journalists aren't taking this maybe more seriously or not reporting it? Okay. So, my answer to that question is the same reason why scientists haven't followed up with this, because of the social stigma that is usually associated with this portfolio, this phenomenon. And I used the example of Mr. Alejandro Rojas here, who I've had the honor and privilege to actually talk with. And I can tell you, as a matter of fact, he is a true blue investigative reporter. He's very, very good at what he does. But because he decides to focus his efforts on this phenomena, obviously there's a lot of stigma involved with that. So that is a question I think that probably who could answer that better than me, more qualified, would be someone like him. But my guess is because of the stigma. It's a career killer. The moment someone starts reporting on UAPs, all of a sudden you think of tinfoil hat and little green people and Elvis on the mothership, and that's a career killer, right? Even if you want to pursue it from a scientific perspective, there's a mountain of stigma. So part of defeating that stigma is first getting the government, which it already did, to acknowledge, yeah, you know what, we're looking at these things. And by the way, we don't want to admit it either, because there's stigma, you know? So it's totally understandable. I have my mic on. You want to take this one off?
I don't know. They're trying to see if they can't get it louder or something like that.
I can do the drill sergeant voice.
Yeah.
All right,
Can you hear me back in the back? Okay, so it's about my illustrious voice versus Lou's, I guess, or something. Yeah, try that maybe, and then we'll see. Yeah, okay. Would we have known about AATIP without you? Are you a whistleblower?
No. A whistleblower is somebody who looks at malfeasance from the government and then comes out and wants protection. I'm not looking for protection, and I didn't see any malfeasance. I simply saw a problem systematically with the government involving silos that needed to be broken down. I am not a leaker, nor am I a whistleblower. Leakers are somebody who provides classified information in an unauthorized manner. And a whistleblower is somebody, like I said, who's trying to point out malfeasance. That's not me, none of those. I'm just a government guy who wanted to have a conversation and got very, very frustrated because I couldn't inform my chain of command. And it was purely because of stigma. That's it.
How many UFO reports did you receive from the military in a year?
Which year?
I love it. Yeah, okay. So, can't talk about it. Okay. Which group has been most skeptical of TTSA? Government, science, or UFO enthusiasts?
Yes. All of them.
All of them. Since AATIP was sanctioned to collect info on aerial threats, why wouldn't they have the radar data from the 2004 event?
I didn't know we didn't.
Scuttlebutt. Reports say that many different species visit here, mostly friendly or indifferent. Does this suggest we are in a neutral zone in interstellar space or unclaimed space?
I am absolutely not qualified to answer that. I have no idea. It would be completely disingenuous of me to tell you what I think because frankly I don't have enough data. So I respect the question. I think it's a great question, but that's a question I think that we need to have philosophers and theologians and the general public have. I'm not qualified. Respectfully, I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Where did AATIP fit into the DIA reporting structure, and how much time did AATIP spend on UFOs?
AATIP itself spent its entire time on UFOs, but it wasn't always at DIA. It was later moved up to OSD. So DIA in the early days was very much integral and part of AATIP, and the results were reported up to chain of command, to the highest levels, by the way. Won't say who, but at the highest levels. But then later it was determined that the organization called AATIP and the effort would be able to do more at the Office of the Secretary of Defense level. And so it was actually taken out of it, DIA. And I'm not sure that fact has come out yet, but that's what happened.
In your personal experience in the threat assessment program, has there been any evidence that could be assessed as a threat by the phenomenon?
So let's, for just a moment, define threat. If you go to an airport and you stand too close to a jet engine, you're probably going to go deaf because they're very loud. So as a result, you can't get too close to the jet engines. That's a threat. It's a threat to your hearing. It's a threat to your safety, right? If you go and you put your head in a microwave, bad things are going to happen, right? I mean, probably not a very smart thing to do. There's a biological threat there. Whether it's intentional or not, I think is the question maybe you might be asking, because we tend to ascribe threats as intentional threats, someone who's out to try to harm you on purpose, wherein we were looking at this not necessarily from an intentional threat, but any kind of threat, environmental threat, biological threat. You know, if you have a pilot that is getting barrel rolls over him with a UAP, and all of a sudden now there's associated hearing loss, is that a threat? Even if it's not intentional. Or if somebody says, look, I came close to one of these things, and all of a sudden when they come back and you see them, they look like they've got radiation burn. Is that a threat? Well, sure it is. It's a medical threat. So I'm careful not to say something is definitively a threat, because I think we need to define first what a threat means. Because threat means something different to different people. And whether you talk to a doctor or you talk to a police officer, threats come in all different shapes and sizes.
Do you believe that there is a government agency, not AATIP, that has real-time access to military UFO reports?
We'll take that as a yes.
We'll take that as a, I don't know, or.
Now or before?
Let's go with now for right now. We've already had Blue Book doing that, so okay. I mean, but now.
I mean, I think I explained to the audience that the effort is alive and well. Read between the lines, whatever that means.
How do you do scientific analysis on something inherently not reproducible like UFOs? How do you do scientific analysis on something that's inherently not reproducible like UFOs? Meaning, I think that more like, a UFO event happens in the sky and then it doesn't happen again in the same space, that type of thing.
Sometimes there are patterns, and I'll leave it at that. So to say that they're not repeatable, I'm not sure I subscribe to that. But let's just say they're not repeatable for argument's sake. I'll suspend what I think, and let's just say they're not repeatable. Well, let's go back to the analogy I said before about the giant squid of the Pacific, right? That's not a repeatable thing. These things are very elusive. They live very, very deep in the ocean. And to actually capture one on camera was almost impossible until we did it. And then we started understanding its migration patterns. We started understanding its feeding patterns. We started understanding its mating patterns. And then we could start drawing patterns that weren't there before. So UAP is no different. We have to collect the data. And then once you have the data begins to speak for itself. Then you can start putting patterns together. And that's exactly what AATIP was doing. We were putting the patterns together, and we were using that under the construct of the 5 observables to do it.
Is all of this disclosure confirmation happening now because the U.S. is behind on our adversaries in developing this technology?
That is a great question. I can't answer on behalf of the U.S. government. What I can say is that if we are aware of another nation who is looking into this, and let's look at the 1970s as an example, when Dr. Hal Puthoff had was working the remote viewing program for several of our members in the intelligence community. We knew that the Russians were doing it too. Speak up more? Okay, still. Folks in the back, can you hear me now? Okay. So the question was regarding UAP specifically, and if any foreign adversaries may be looking at these things. My response to that is no different than in the 1970s during the remote viewing program that Hal Puthoff, my colleague here, was running. We knew definitively that the Russians were looking at this too. So as a result, we need to look at it. Because what may be pseudoscience today could be a breakthrough advantage tomorrow. And so looking at UAPs, sure, yeah, there's other countries that are interested. I just showed you a slide there that showed you countries that are interested. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that the United States would want to keep a strategic edge over its potential adversaries, and especially in this regard. Especially, look, if one of those observables was mastered by a foreign country, whether it was hypersonic velocity, we hear now about the new hypersonic cruise missile that Putin is putting out, right? And it's got everybody terrified. Well, that's just one of those observables. Imagine a craft that can do all 5 of those. Think how terrifying that would be, right? So yeah, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we avoid strategic surprise by our potential adversaries. So not sure if that answered the question for you, but I think it's safe to assume that, there's adversaries doing the same thing.
Did the AATIP program at all look at any of the like the abduction phenomena, or does it have any knowledge or evidence of extraterrestrial beings in physical form?
I'm not qualified to answer that. I think you would be best after this or sometime this weekend talking to my colleague Hal. Not to throw you under the bus, but he's far better at answering that question than I am.
Have you or TTSA found any exploitable technologies or theoretical concepts from UAP data that are exploitable? And if so, how public will this be?
Yeah, absolutely we did. And I think it's already, in some cases, already going public. Let's look at the warping of space-time. So this is something that people kind of get excited about and really don't understand what that means when we talk about warping space-time. What we're talking about is there's two fundamental ways in which mankind is aware that you can warp space-time. And that is with a lot of mass or matter, like Earth or the sun or anything other celestial body that warps space-time, or a heck of a lot of energy. Because as we know, energy and matter are really inextricably entwined. It's almost like steam compared to ice. They look and feel fundamentally different, but they're really kind of the same thing. So when you hear that the CERN and the Large Hadron Collider is now at the point energy levels where we are creating micro black holes, and of course everybody gets scared that they're going to suck the Earth in. That's not going to happen. All they're simply saying is that we're approaching the energy levels now where we are warping space-time in the laboratory, and we're doing it with energy. That's all they're saying. And so we've already accomplished that. We have already crossed that bridge. It's not a matter of theoretical possibility, can we warp space-time? We're doing it right now. So the question has now becomes a technological question. When does the technology and the science catch up so we can scale it to a usable size that now we can actually take advantage of? But yes, a lot of those studies that you see are real studies. The Drake's equation now that people are aware of, I mean, that was a very real study. And the math is real. Warp drive, that's not pseudoscience. That, what you see in those papers, are now being substantiated at the CERN and the Large Hadron Collider. Those very same principles. We talk about quantum entanglement. We talk about teleportation. These things that we thought were science fiction, we're now doing it on a routine basis. In fact, the Air Force has done some of this stuff, and same with DARPA. So yeah, I mean, I guess to answer your question succinctly, absolutely.
Do you see the UAP issue as being potentially politically unifying, meaning the Dems and Republicans working together on this issue?
It has already demonstrated to be a bipartisan issue in the past. We know that between Inouye, Stevens, Reed, and John Glenn. And there was others as well. And now we've seen in this last request from the late senator from Arizona, John McCain, that there were Democrats on that request, that FOIA request that went up to, wasn't really a FOIA request, it's just a request that went up to DIA. That was bipartisan. So yeah, you're seeing it. You're seeing it in action. It's in writing. So I think that's also very good because it shows that Washington can cooperate with itself when it needs to.
During the Nimitz encounter period, NASA was testing the X-43A Hyper X in the same theater of operation. Do you know of any NASA confirmation of any anomalous activity in the air that they monitored?
That's one thing that we address very, very diligently, and you'll see that probably in the coming weeks, coming months. There was a test, a hypersonic test, but you have to understand how those tests work, and they use a Pegasus rocket, and basically it's a very linear trajectory, and there's a specific apogee, which I can't go into, but there's a very specific signature, and there's no way to confuse a testing of a hypersonic scaled down rocket using scramjet with what we're seeing. Hypersonic cruise missiles don't do barrel rolls, they don't hover, they don't do a lot of the things that we're seeing. So we know it wasn't a hypersonic cruise missile. NASA knows it wasn't too, because we know where they shot it, we know where they flew it. That's about probably what I can say about that.
Given that scientists are analyzing the materials and elements composition of the space material, like things like stars, planets, nebula, and more, what is being done to analyze the material composition of AAP, and might the same tools be used to identify substance materials?
Again, great question, and I'm going to give that to Hal.
That's a Hal question.
That is definitely a Hal question.
Hal question.
All right. Has anyone ever received a measurable dose of radiation from exposure to an AAP?
Hal. You heard him just say it. I can't say it, but
Yes.
there you have it.
The answer from Hal was yes. Will we ever hear anything from TTSA about the squares inside of a sphere AAVs that David Fravor spoke of?
Yep.
You're doing very well with this, by the way. How much of the keep it quiet be a holdover from the panic created by the 1938 radio broadcast by Orson Welles that we've been invaded? Fundamentally, is it not a matter of who controls the information? If you control the information, you effectively control the people.
Great question. That's why I think we need to engage our academics, our political leaders, our philosophers, our theologians, because this conversation involves them as well. Those are the ones that have to figure out what type of impact this has to society. But let's look at history as a brief measure. Let's just go back even a year ago. There was some fear by a lot of people that if you acknowledge this, then all of a sudden religions would go crazy and melt down, and governments would go haywire, and all society would just kind of go into mass pandemonium. Well, that didn't happen, did it? You just had the New York Times run an article. You had the Pentagon admit that the program was real. They even released videos, and no religions fell. No governments crumbled. So I have a little bit more faith in mankind. I don't think that we're as fragile as some people think. I mean, we trust the American people with the knowledge that there could be an Ebola outbreak at any time, or that there could be a super flu, or that there is a rogue nation that is trying to build nuclear capabilities against our interests. So I have faith in the American people that they're probably okay to handle the truth. That's my perspective.
Releasing some information, promising to release more, and frustrating people when nothing significant happens for months can be a counterproductive. Why does TTSA follow that pattern?
Well, what I would say is, remember the analogy I use about the wave tops. There's a whole lot going below the surface, and what we don't want to do is jeopardize those efforts just to satisfy idle curiosity. No disrespect intended. I understand people are very passionate about this, but we do not want to prematurely go down that path and wind up cutting the very avenues that we have worked so hard to establish to push this over the finish line. This is not a sprint, folks. This is a marathon. This is not the beginning of the end. This is not even the end of the beginning. This is going to be a long haul, and this is going to take patience, a lot of patience. And the last thing you want to do is just rush through this and kind of say, I told you so. That's not what this is about. We only have one chance to do this the right way, and we've got a lot of chances to do it the wrong way. So our approach is to try to be very deliberate about this. We understand people are hungry for information. That's why you have people like Hal and I coming out here to do these conferences. We want to give you the information. We want to satisfy that itch that you have, but at the same time, we don't want to jeopardize the things that we have going on right now that I promise you in the end will be worth it. You're going to look back and say, oh man, you're right. That makes sense. I can see why you couldn't have that conversation right then. So I do understand it's frustrating, and I know it comes across as disingenuous. All I can say is have a little patience. I mean, look what we've done in the last year. I mean, if any other person or organization even did one of those things, they'd be hailed as, oh, those guys are great. But, you know, I feel like we can't catch a break. I mean, you've got the government admitting that the program was real. And you have Congress admitting that they established it and that there was money to it and that there were results and that there were findings and there were studies and there were videos. And by the way, the program's still running. So, I mean, it's like saying, hey, well, you know, I want to know everything the CIA knows. Well, you're not going to know all that because some of that stuff is still going on. So if it's going on, you're not going to know now. Those of you who work here near Redstone Arsenal can appreciate that. You know, you're not going to jeopardize ongoing mission just to satisfy curiosity. And I know it's frustrating, but that is the environment we're in, and we have to respect that. So what you're going to continue to see are these bits of information coming out that allow you to put the puzzle together and allow everybody else to understand what's going on. Again, it's not our job to just come out and be full disclosure. People tell me all the time, you know, we demand the truth, we know, we deserve the truth. Well, I don't doubt that, but hey, no offense, but I don't work for you. You know, I mean, I'm trying to do something here that's for the collective good, and if I had to go out and address each and every single time somebody wanted to know something, we wouldn't be where we are today. So I get it, I understand it, I respect it.
By the way, have we mentioned anything about that thing coming out in May? I didn't mention it. So, just to let you know, there's a show that's going to be coming on the History Channel about the phenomena. I think it's called the phenomena, right? The Unidentified, yes. The Unidentified is the name of it on the History Channel. And I think this gentleman and a lot of the, you know, probably Hal's in it and a variety of other people are in it, and it's going to be a very exciting show. We're looking forward to it. I think it's like a 6-part show or something like that? It's a docuseries.
And so what you can expect is a 6-part docuseries by investigative journalists who were with us, and we have on camera some pretty remarkable stuff. And I think you're gonna look back and say, oh wow, I didn't know that. And hopefully at that point you'll begin to understand why you know it's been a little bit of a slow dribble lately. It's important that we help frame the conversation in a way that is universally understood. We can't just paint a message that only scientists will understand, or only millennials will understand, or only, you know, certain sectors. It's got to be universally applicable, so everybody has a chance to absorb the information and process the information, then make the determination for themselves what it means to them. We're not going to tell you what to think about it. You need to do that job. You need to think about what this information is going to mean to you. And we have a lot of exclusive stuff. I mean, I think it's going to be changing the conversation.
Are there instances of damage done by UFOs or AAPs that you're aware of? And then also, has there been any damage to countries or any threats to the national security?
Simply put, yes, but that narrative is still being constructed. So you can actually see it yourself. So patience. I don't think it's going to be some of the people are going to, you know, go crazy about it and say, oh, people getting zapped. That's not what we're talking about. But I think there's been some very interesting provocations. And I think those provocations will be something that we will explore.
Has the government program built software to find patterns and be able to predict sightings, predictive behavior and capabilities? Yeah. So the gist of it, let me share something. I work at the base over here, right? It's a great question. And one of the challenges that we've had all along in ufology is being able to predict, after you get through all of the UFO reports, right? Realizing that you can explain probably 90% of them, right? Then you get down to the residual 10%, where you can't really do it, and then how many of those things are classified projects, or flights that you don't even know about, right? So some of those might fall off. So you're now talking about 5%. What I'm trying to tell you is that UFO sightings that are typically like the unknowns are extremely rare. And
And if I may add real quick, look, if you have analytic data that allows you to identify an unidentified aerial vehicle in your airspace, that's the same type of technology you can use to identify a foreign adversarial aircraft or one of your own experimental aircraft, right? So this applies more than to just UAP. So I'm not being cagey with you on purpose or trying to be cute. I'm just letting you know that there's things that I'm not at liberty to discuss because they apply to more than just one thing. And so because of that, for certain reasons, I'm not at liberty to have a conversation about that. So just so you understand my perspective, I'm not trying to be cagey.
is AATIP a partner in any way with Solar Warden?
Not to my knowledge. I've never heard of that company, probably my ignorance. But no. Hal, are you aware of that?
It's just a conspiracy thing about there's a completely reverse engineered operations going on.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I'm sorry. I really don't.
Here's a little break kind of question. What can people do to support the efforts of TTSA?
Be patient. That's what you can do. Be patient. Try to be a little more understanding. I know it's tough, but we are working very, very hard to bring this forward, and it's not easy. And this is not a get rich quick scheme. Most of us have suffered severe financial duress doing this. I mean, you leave a lucrative government job, you're at the top of your game, you're parking in the same parking lot that the Secretary of Defense parks in. You've got 401ks, you've got pensions, you've got retirement, you've got life insurance, you've got health insurance, you leave that all behind to do this. Be patient, please, is what I would ask. And check in from time to time. We're approachable. I mean, talk to us. Talk to Hal, talk to me. Just call us. Write an email to the stars. We answer them. Believe it or not, there's people out there that will tell you, hey, actually, you know what? I wrote a blog, and they responded. I mean, we're not unapproachable. We're not Hollywood superstars. We're just people, and we're just trying to do the mission that you all expect us to do. That's all. I mean, we're held accountable. We have investors, and we have to protect their investment as well. So it's even if I wanted to do what I wanted to do, I can't. I have to make sure that what we're doing is for the good, for the collective good of what our mission statement says. We are B Corporation, so it's for a public benefit, but at the same time, we also have investors. So, and I'm not a business guy, so I can't really talk much about that. I just know that we have to sometimes walk a bit of a tightrope. So I would ask that you please be patient.
At a gathering in Italy last year, you acknowledged briefly a pattern of UFO interest in nuclear weapon sites. The research of Robert Hastings has shown that this association has persisted for 70 years. He's done a great job with that information. Some think the UFO interest in nukes is protective of the human race, but this could be wishful thinking. Why do you think UFOs show a persistent interest in nukes? And did AATIP ever look at any of that?
I have a personal position on it, but I'm loath to provide my personal position because at the end of the day, as I've told people before, I can be absolutely sure of something and I can still be absolutely wrong. So I'd rather let the facts and data speak for themselves. Yes, there's some synergies there. There's some congruencies, absolutely. We do know for a fact that there is some interest, strategic interest in our nuclear capabilities, albeit whether it's nuclear energy, nuclear weapons development, nuclear delivery capabilities, but that's about all I can say because we get really, if I didn't have a security clearance, I could probably talk a lot more about this, but I can't. I can't even speculate because if you will, the crown jewel to U.S. defense is its nuclear capability. And the U.S. government's very, very protective of that information. So, and I don't want to speculate. Again, if you're really interested, come talk to me afterwards, and I'll share with you my view. But I'm going to caveat now very publicly that I could be wrong. And so just take it with a grain of salt. I don't want anybody taking what I think as being gospel and now thinking, okay, this is the way it is, because I'm giving my opinion in an unqualified situation.
Considering that we're in the land of NASA, what was or is NASA's role in any study or investigating of this phenomenon?
Huge. NASA's role, I look at this as kind of a three-pillar capability, and please forgive me, this is the first time I've really spoke about this. One of my colleagues kind of feels this way too. You have SETI, which is out there looking for radio signals and looking for life, potentially intelligent life from well beyond the Milky Way. Then you have NASA looking for microbial life right here within our solar system. Then you have TTSA looking at maybe the other option, that it's already here. And it's here now. And it's impacting our national security equities. So I think we need to work together collectively. I don't think this is a either or situation. I think we have to work together. NASA has the capabilities and resources to look at this from their perspective. Just as SETI has their mission, just as we have ours. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think NASA's role is huge.
Did you at any time find any kind of indications that that we have a very strong relationship that exists between the UFO phenomena and oceans? The planet is definitely surrounded by 3/4 water. In fact, I question why we call it Earth. It might be better named water. Okay, so that being said, are we talking about a phenomenon that has a relationship to the oceans, especially like when you consider those Nimitz cases and stuff like that, right?
That's a very fair question, and I think that would be a very safe presumption. Yeah, I mean, and now look, the Navy has a global presence, so everybody knows about the Nimitz incident, and we'll soon learn about some other ones. So it could just be a fact that they are everywhere that everybody else isn't. But we believe that there is some there's some relationship with water. Now, what does that mean? Is it because there's they're under the ocean, or is it because maybe there's the hydrogen is being mined as a fuel source? Or I mean, you could run wild with speculation, right? So this is again why we need more data. I could sit here and tell you all the theories that some of the folks in the AATIP have had. But that's not going to do any good. At the end of the day, we just need more data, and we need the data in order to help paint that picture, and then maybe we can start making some assessment as to why this affinity to H2O.
We talked a little bit about this at the table this evening, but was the Vatican or the Catholic Church ever involved in AATIP in any way? Please explain this. Is this consistent with the work of Dr. Diane Pasulka?
Sorry, Luis.
I can't speak on behalf of the Vatican, and that is a question that you'd have to ask the Vatican, right? So it's like a kid when it says, "Hey, Mom, can I go to the mall?" Well, you need to ask your father, right? I don't want to say yes or no. I'd rather, if you're asking me a question that involves a third party, you need to first ask that third party out of respect for them. I don't want to answer in any way, shape, or form. I don't have that authority, and I don't want to assume to have that authority. I think it's safe to say that they have an interest, and they should. I think all churches should. I think any religion should, because this applies to them just as much as it does to you and me. So. That's probably about all I can say about that.
What was the role of the U.S. Navy and or the NRO in the AATIP?
Tough crowd.
That's you, not me.
Yeah. I don't think I can talk about that. Yeah, I don't talk about that.
Did AATIP ever investigate abductions? And can you explain, were there any patterns between abductees like Rh negative blood, consciousness, etc.?
Can I buy a vowel instead? Over to Hal.
That's a Hal question. All right. For Mr. Elizondo, okay, were the following people read onto the AATIP, like Mr. Brennan, General Clapper, General Mattis, General Kelly, General Flynn, or General Ashley?
I absolutely cannot answer that question.
Did the AATIP MUFON STAR teams or Bigelow Aerospace ever collect, retrieve, or procure any biological evidence, DNA, or genetic material? If so, can you explain?
That is a question I'd have to, really good, insightful questions. That's a question that I would leave to an individual who I've always looked up to, Mr. Bob Bigelow, to answer. You're asking about what he did in his company under Bigelow. You didn't say AATIP, so you said Bigelow. So I have to defer to Mr. Robert Bigelow to answer those questions.
Which installations did the AATIP reside at? Not asking for any classified specifics.
It was a confederated effort. It was over several locations. I can't say specifically where, but it was throughout the National Capital Region and beyond.
This is pertinent to a lot of people that after the announcement about you came out, everybody was going to crazily FOIA requests, as you very well imagine. Which military service agency within the IC would be the best focal point for FOIA requests related to the phenomena, AATIP, and/or this technology?
If I was a betting man, I would probably stick to knocking on the doors of DIA. They have already admitted that they, after some time, that they actually were running part of the program. I'd keep knocking on those doors.
In reference to, this is from your previous presentation, it says, in reference to the group of U.S. government leaders who felt the phenomena was demonic, would this same group be known under the moniker of Collins Elite?
I'm not going to assign labels. There were absolutely a core group of individuals that were adamantly against what we were doing, not because the empirical data wasn't there, but because it was philosophically in contradiction to their philosophical belief system. I respect it. I don't agree with it, but I respect it. And one of these individuals was actually a very close colleague and mentor of mine. So imagine that. Imagine having somebody who you look up to for so long and who's a very senior person in the intelligence community telling you not to pursue this because it went against his ideological belief system. Yeah, true story.
To your knowledge, has anyone ever estimated the number of anomalous craft present on Earth at any given time? Is it tens, hundreds, or thousands?
That is a great question. I honestly have no idea, but it's something that if it's okay, whoever asked that question, I'd like to add it to my requisite. That would be a phenomenally fascinating point of research. So if it's okay, whoever wrote that, thank you. I'm going to steal it, and we'll start to see if we can find out.
You guys write great questions, by the way. These are very, very in-depth. Okay, and I just want to applaud this gentleman next to me because he is trying to carefully tell us dance a sweat dance up here. Yeah. Can you explain how the DoD's space fence is related to the study or surveillance of this phenomenon?
Okay, so let's look at it this way. if you're looking at signatures of an incoming ICBM missile, and that signature is coming in from orbit at tens of thousands of miles an hour, we'll say. And it's very small and can do certain things. And oh, look, low observability, hypersonic velocities, right? Already we got 2 of those observables there. Then maybe some of those same capabilities can be leveraged to look at the UAP, right? So wouldn't you want to use some of those same assets and capabilities that you do to identify more conventional type threats if you can dual use it to serve the purpose of also looking at UAPs? And then if you can go ahead and overlay it in a way where you're using, you know, high orbit, mid orbit, low orbit, atmospheric all together, right? And you stitch that together, now you have a really good common operating picture of the battle space. So again, I can't answer that question specifically, but I can tell you from a common sense perspective, yeah, of course that makes sense. Yeah, you want to leverage the hell out of those things.
Which services and/or agencies do not want disclosure confirmation or would not support it in your opinion?
All of them. I am sure they want me to go away yesterday.
You do not see the man behind that curtain over there. Or in that SUV on there. Okay. The accelerations of these craft are on the order of 1,000s of Gs. What information or data exists to indicate how these craft work? And what is known about how they work? Follow up. Oh, wow. Is it often assumed that they are warping space with the, like, Alcubierre drive, or what evidence is there for this? We have no theory of quantum gravity. Could quantum gravity be more relevant?
So let's start with the instantaneous acceleration. Yes, there are scientific models and how it can give you better explanation of it, but if you reduce the mass of something, you reduce the inertial forces. Okay, that's simple. That's physics. So if you have the technology to reduce the mass of something, then you have the ability to maneuver in ways that conventional technology currently doesn't have that ability to do. But furthermore, if you can warp space-time, all sorts of interesting things can happen. But let me put this out there. Warping space-time is in a, forgive the pun, it's relative. It's not really real, but relative. Let's say hypothetically, I mean, we're all sitting on the surface of this Earth right now. We're all affected by gravity equally. But what if you had some special material that, under certain circumstances, created a field around you, and that field actually insulated yourself from the natural effects of Earth's gravity? Now, 2 things would happen. People talk about the first observable, which is, oh, well, all of a sudden now you float in the sky and you don't need an engine, but something else happens. Because remember what Einstein said, space and time are together. So if you insulate yourself from the effects of Earth's gravity, by definition, you have to insulate yourself from all the effects of Earth's gravity, to include time. And remember, folks, time goes by differently for us here on this planet than it does even for some of our GPS satellites up there, because they're fundamentally further away from the mass of Earth. So the cesium atomic clocks go by at a different rate. Time is relative. So if you were to have the ability to insulate yourself, cocoon yourself from the effects of Earth's gravity, well, time itself would go by different, wouldn't it? And all sorts of things would happen. And if you had this, let's say, bubble where this event horizon was around this glass here, well, it would appear to be kind of weird looking too. It'd be kind of like this weird low observable thing. And also, it would have this ability to travel at speeds that would just not be possible for us. And would also be able to maneuver in ways that would seem to be magic, instantaneous acceleration, when in reality, if you were inside that bubble, it would be a walk in the park. We would all be going in slow motion, but But to us, this thing is maneuvering in ways that seem like magic. And well, positive lift, well, if gravity's not pulling you down, now you don't have to worry about actually having some sort of engine source because gravity doesn't exist for you. And so all sorts of things become possible. So maybe, instead of there being 5 exotic technologies to explain the 5 different observables, maybe all what we're seeing, all those observables, are really a manifestation of a single technology and the ability to insulate yourself from whatever gravitational force is in the environment. So, something to think about.
Why don't we put together the brightest minds from every university or lab in the country, or even the world, especially since physicists and engineers are to recover any captured advanced technology, alien or otherwise, whatever the source? Why aren't we enlisting all that wonderful brain matter that way?
I thought that's what this was, no? Isn't that what you guys do? That's exactly what we need to do. That's what we're trying to do. It takes time. You gotta break down stigmas. You gotta have conversations like this with rational-minded people. And then they have to have conversations with other rational-minded people and convince scientists that it's okay to have a conversation about things that we don't quite yet understand. But that takes time. You have to convince investigative reporters like Mr. Alejandro Rojas, who's willing to go out on a limb and cover this kind of stuff. But he does it because he believes in what he's doing. So we need more people like that. There's a couple other people here in the audience that I recognize too that have put their credibility on the line to pursue this. And that's exactly what I mean. So the conversation began last year and is continuing to move forward. You have momentum now like you've never had before. You have Congress listening. You have the administration listening. And they're not turning their backs, they're not giggling, they're not laughing. They're taking this with dead seriousness. And so I don't know how more of a profound accomplishment you want. You did it. Now let's not screw it up. We got this far because people know we're serious, and we're not into the world of trying to play gotcha or I told you so or anything like that. We're trying to push the conversation forward where it belongs, so humanity can try to finally figure out what this all means.
This is a kind of interesting question. It says, for alleged abduction cases, especially for individuals claiming repeated visitations, why aren't we doing the best to be able to equip their bedrooms with cameras? There you go. And bodies with subcutaneous GPS chips in order to record scientific evidence. Just want to point out something the other day. How many of you wear a Fitbit? Okay, just want to point out to you that the interesting thing that this is actually recording my heart rate, the fact that I'm sleeping all night long, recording every minute, and you know, it's got the whole thing talking about the number of steps that I take. Would it be an interesting experiment to be able to take this and put this on people who are claiming abductions, to actually have this remotely the data gathered or something like that, and looking at that? These are kinds of things that, you know, that we can approach it in a different way if we have those kind of things and look for data. We don't know what the effects of this would be on those individuals, but it gives you some sort of metrics to be able to understand what they might be going through. So I just wanted to share that with you.
That's a really good question. I think what's important to know that, you know, I was a creature of the intelligence community, and I always preferred the shadows. This whole spotlight thing is new to me, and I don't particularly like it. It's pretty uncomfortable. But intelligence, which is where AATIP fell under, follows certain rules. And what a lot of people don't realize, especially the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, we have something called intelligence oversight. And anytime you deal with Joe Public, there are very specific procedures and circumstances that either allow us or don't allow us, prohibit us from dealing with the public. And when you talk about actually medical stuff, we start getting into a world of what we call human experimentation. That is what they call a Procedure 13 in DoD Directive 5200 series. I think it's 5240 if I'm not mistaken. And so it's either that or .1. And so we have to be very careful because in the past, the government and the military was unfortunately at times guilty of doing things on human beings that probably shouldn't have. And that goes back even to World War II when we were doing the atomic testing. So that Procedure 13 is a very serious violation. For me to go out and do anything regarding biological as an intelligence officer of the United States government on another human being would very, very quickly raise eyebrows and very likely land me in jail.
When you say that we will learn more about the Nimitz and other cases, do you mean that this is going to be on that History Channel program?
I do. What better way to get the conversation going than let everybody see it themselves, right? One thing is for me to sit here in a suit and tell you something. Another thing is for you to sit there and actually watch and talk to the people who were there and see it for yourself. So yes, that's our hope, that you will, in May, begin to appreciate why we've been quiet for the last 7 months. I don't want to speak specifically about certain things, but hopefully you can be the judge of that yourself.
These are two kind of related questions relative to the Skinwalker Ranch. Do you know anything about the relationship between UFOs and the paranormal at the Skinwalker Ranch? I find it extremely puzzling. And then the other one was like, what is your position on the kind of phenomena witnessed at Skinwalker Ranch, and is it related to UFOs or some kind of otherworldly entities?
Okay, I'm going to speak to you from Lou right now. This is my opinion. I am deliberately not going to address this from an AATIP perspective. I think we live in a really big universe. Most people realize now that there are several 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and there are several 100 billion stars in the observable universe. And the last time we looked at the assessment was that there were more stars in the observable universe than there are grains of sand on all the beaches in the entire world. Okay, that is a phenomenally, almost impossibly large number to wrap your head around. And in fact, if I look to my left and I go 13.5 billion, I go 13.5 billion light years in that direction, and I look to my right and I go 13.5 billion light years in that direction, that's a distance of 27 billion light years in between. And that's just what we can see. So there's a lot of stuff out there that we don't know. We don't even understand half of what's in our ocean, or even in our neighborhood, right? How many of you know who your kid sits next to in lunch class? Probably not many, right? So there's a lot that we don't know. So for us to speculate that that everything we see that's it, I think is short-sighted. I think when you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, I'm looking at you right now through a very small sliver that we call visible light. Okay, very small sliver. But we know there's infrared, ultraviolet, X-ray, everything from all the way to gamma radiation, cosmic radiation, all the way down to microwave and everything down below. And we look at the universe that way. How many times do we look through a Hubble telescope in the optical field and we see nothing but black space? But the moment you put it to infrared, bang, the whole universe lights up, right? It was invisible to our naked eye, and yet it's very real and very there. We see quasars that way. That's how we see quasars, from billions of light years away, before this planet was even here. That light left, that quasar. So for us to assume that this is it, everything you see that's it. I mean, I would submit to you then, if that's the case, then how do you explain love? You can't see it. You can't hear it. You can't really even measure it with your 5 senses, and yet most people in this room would agree that it's real. Yet we can't even explain it. So if we can't even explain that, who's to say these other things aren't real? You know, there's cultures out there, Native American cultures, that consider this very much a reality, this alternate universe, so to speak. Who are we to say that they're wrong? We're not. So again, I think we need a lot more data. And for those people who were pioneering and visionary enough to explore that, I salute them. Why wouldn't you want to explore that? Why not? Well, you don't, because of stigma. And that's what we need to overcome. Because stigma at the end of the day will paralyze everybody from everything. You will never move forward. that man would never have gotten on the moon right there. Because, by the way, the picture below that I was referring to, about that dusty road with a bunch of Model Ts on it, the scientists, just 45 years before that picture of the man on the moon was taken, there were actual serious scientists who believed the moon was made out of cheese. Cheese! I'm not kidding you. Now, we laugh and we think that's ridiculous now, but that was real. There was a time when the patent office said, we're going to close down because in 10 years everything that needs to be invented will have been invented. How short-sighted, right? There was a time where the Air Force was absolutely sure that we would never be able to break the sound barrier. You got a Saturn V rocket out there that did it just 10 years after that. So I think we need to change our paradigm a little bit as human beings and what it means to be a human being. That's all I have to say about that.
I have a lot of related questions here, like what's going on in Antarctica? Somebody asked about that. What are your thoughts on Antarctica, Dulce? It's very cold. Yeah, that's very true. You have everything from Richard Doty to a lot of people ask you about Richard Doty, who seems to work. You know, he was working for OSI as a government agency, and helping to plant in somebody's mind some fake material, like using kind of like a strategy to be able to, we would use in military efforts with another country where we're trying to influence something. But I guess what I'm trying to get at, and what they're trying to get at here is, what are your thoughts about all these things? And is there a secret space program?
I don't know Mr. Doty, so I'm not going to comment. He's not relevant to the discussion that my colleagues and I have. I respect people's opinions. Hopefully they respect mine. But I can't comment about somebody that I've never met. And I deliberately choose not to do that. There's a lot of people out there that do that with me, and I don't really appreciate it. There's a lot of people out there that assume I have some sort of ulterior motive or that I'm trying to do something underhanded, and they've never met me, they've never talked to me. So I'm gonna politely sidestep that question because I don't know the individual. As far as the secret space force, is that what you said? I don't know if it's such a secret anymore. I mean, I think they kind of made an announcement, right? They want to make a space force. As far as historical space force, and that's what I've heard about. Discussions about going to different planets. I don't know.
So, there's a group of people, these like Richard Doty, not Richard Doty, but Passaggio and a whole variety of people who have claimed that they've been out there, and they basically, I think they saw Obama when he was out there too, and there were blue people and various other things. Anyway, that's what they're talking about. I know you're talking about the new Space Force we're going to get, and maybe now it's going to be put under the Air Force. I think that's what. But this is a whole different matter, and this is on that whole conspiracy kind of thing that's going on. Not a world you played in, sir. Thankfully. Let's see. Who made the decision to release the information in the Pentagon? Was it a group committee decision, or how did that happen?
It was a group decision that then went up to the DoD for final approval through the official DoD 1910 process. And it was the DOPSR, the official DOPSR office, that is responsible, chartered for making that decision. And ultimately the decision was up to them, and they approved it.
Is the government consulting AATIP or anyone else on how to release information without disrupting the status quo? In other words, is the government afraid people are going to freak out?
I don't want to answer anything involving right now what the government may or may not be asking us to do, because I think it would require the government to answer part of that question. And I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of the government.
Is there a connection to the current phenomenon and Operation Paperclip? I don't know if are you familiar with Paperclip and the Von Braun?
As it regards to AATIP, no. Historically, I can't answer that. That would be another how question.
In the era of iPhones and YouTube, including horrific videos of 9/11, for example, why do we not have more incontrovertible evidence of AAPs and USCs? Does the government intercept and confiscate it all? Why don't we have high-res photos from the general public using smartphones?
So let's go back to the great squid. It's real. How many of you have a really close picture of a blue whale breaching that you took? Probably not many. And yet, we all know they're real. We know they're there, right? There are pictures that have been taken with blue whales and giant squid and these other elusive creatures, but most of Joe Public never really gets to see them because they are elusive. That's why they for so long they're a point of conjecture. So to say that pictures like that don't exist, they do exist. Why hasn't Joe Public taken any of those? Well, I'm not sure they haven't. I don't know. I think there's a lot of stuff that's coming out on social media on a semi-regular basis. I haven't been able to do the research and analysis on it, but maybe we should. I don't know.
You mentioned these UAPs had the capabilities to hover for days. When was this observed, and what was the response?
Stay tuned. Yes, that we have actual data with these things being able to do that from very reliable, highly trained sources, and the data is there. What was done about it? Well, you saw with the Nimitz, we scrambled something out to go look at it.
Is the current political and social landscape having a positive or negative impact on research and disclosure?
Neither, really. I think people think this is a political issue, but I don't really think it is. I think most politicians want to stay far away from it until they have to be involved. Probably a politically smart thing to do. I don't blame them necessarily. But we're past that. And it's been my experience before and my experience now that it is absolutely a bipartisan issue. And no one seems to be making this a political issue, thankfully. The individuals that I have been fortunate enough to be exposed to in our higher levels of government, every single one of them has taken this stone cold serious. And for me, that's encouraging. I mean, that means that our government is trying to work. It's listening, and it's not scoffing, and it's not one or two. It's started off with 4 or 5, became 7, became 9, and now you've got a lot of people involved. So that's great news.
Given how we have identified numerous Earth-like planets, exoplanets nearby, has anyone ever attempted to craft trajectories to exoplanets, which we then can point our telescopes and SETI towards?
AATIP did not. We were too focused on the here and now. It was more as to what are these things doing in our operational environments, and are they a threat to our military capabilities, and what are their capabilities? That was our focus.
Why, in your opinion, has the public lost interest in general with the space race? Why haven't we not been back to the moon for years?
Pure conjecture on my part. I think for the last decade and a half, we've been a society that's been pretty distracted. We've been distracted with global issues, whether it be terrorism, whether it be wars and conflict, whether it be climate change, whether it be whatever issue du jour we've been dealing with. But these issues require a lot of money, and they don't lend themselves to being distracted by outside things. And so when you talk about the UAP quote unquote threat, Well, at the end of the day, you have to determine to yourself what's more of a threat. North Korea with nuclear capabilities and ISIS, or UAPs. And there's only so much money, so much resources to go around. So until you tell me a UAP has just blown up one of my aircraft carriers, you know what? That's not my priority. That's my priority. And so I understand that from a military perspective, that makes sense. I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't think this is like a conversation about fine wine that gets better the longer you leave a cork in it. I think we need to have the conversation now. I think yesterday. But I do understand from that corporate perspective why maybe this is not, why we haven't been into another space race, so to speak. It's just not a national priority. But at the end of the day, if it's not a national priority, it's because you didn't make it a national priority. And yes, I'm putting that on your shoulders squarely. Because you are the people. You are the ones who elect officials. You are the ones that set what the priority should be. And so if you're not doing it, then somebody else will do it for you. So if you want this to be a national priority, then you have to engage your elected officials. That's what they're there for. And tell them you want this to be a priority. And give them briefings. And give them data. And then it becomes a national priority. And I'll go out on a limb here. I think it's becoming one again. I think we're getting there.
Convincing scientists that these craft are real is of paramount importance to progress. What information can be disclosed? What type of data that will convince and enlist the scientific community?
You know, it's funny when you talk to a scientist, when you you get a couple whiskeys in him or her and have a serious conversation, and a lot of times they'll tell you, you know, it's funny, my mom told me a story growing up that she saw a UFO, or, you know what, I saw something once, I was on a desert road, and, you know, I just can't explain it. So, you know, I think scientists are people like everybody else. I think they are subject to peer pressure. I think they're subject to ridicule. I think they're subject to budgets. Nobody wants to lose your funding. Nobody wants to, you know, I mean, come on, we all got mortgages to pay. So I get it. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the scientists that are involved in this, they do it on the down low because it's considered fringe. It's taboo, right? So the question is, how do we break that taboo? How do we break that stigma so scientists can? I mean, look, you're sitting here with a guy who ran the psychic program for the U.S. government. I mean, I don't know how more taboo that gets. And yet it was real, and he got it off the ground, and it was running, and it was successful. Now, you call it something fancy like remote viewing, but at the end of the day, it's a pretty interesting stuff. You're using human cognitive capabilities to collect espionage on a foreign country separated by space and time. I mean, if that's not wild science, I don't know what it is, right? And yet he succeeded. And he is a real scientist. He is one of the best of the best. So if you want to know how you crack that code, that's the guy you talk to. Because I'm not a scientist. I'm just an old gumshoe investigator. He's the guy who did it. And he did it again and again and again. He's got a track record of doing that, of breaking taboos, breaking barriers, and making programs that, by the way, have kept this country safe for a very long time. So my suggestion is you should ask him.
Can you speak about the NORAD intercept data that happens on a regular basis?
I cannot.
Have the preliminary results of your recent materials analyses supported or challenged your theories on the physics behind the phenomenon?
Supported on the physics, but some of the material, like I said, has turned out, it looks like, to be fairly ordinary. So it's really, we're talking about the minority of material that is truly extraordinary. And that has reinforced the opinions and the conclusions so far that we have.
Is any of your focus on the occupants of the UAPs?
When you say you, me, or you, TTSA, or you, AATIP?
Is any of your focus on the occupants of the UAP? Who asked that question?
I did.
Can you tell me if that related to what? ATIP, TTSA, or what?
That would be more towards both ATIP and TTSA and what they're doing now.
ATIP, to a limited degree. Yeah, to a limited degree, early on. TTSA, yep, sure, absolutely. We want to cast a wide net. We want to catch as many fish as we can. So you cast a really, really wide net. Now you're going to reel in a lot of minnows, we got it. But you also may get some sizable fish there that you want to keep. So that's been our strategy.
Have we attempted to shoot down any AAP? Have we succeeded? Have we recovered any tech or beings, dead or alive? Out of curiosity, did ATIP program look at or consider any of the stuff that like maybe Len Stringfield did with the crash retrievals, or look into any of those crashes? Okay. Okay. Notionally or explicitly, has anybody studied the physical or psychological effects on observers?
Yep. There's actually some very qualified individuals in the medical field. I can't comment on what they're doing and what they have done, but these are extremely professional individuals who have the qualifications, expertise, and the vitae to answer that question, and they're looking at it.
So is anything known about the pilots, biological or autonomous, of these craft? Is there anything known about the pilots themselves, I guess, of these craft?
At this point, I wouldn't want to assume anything. I don't want to say there's pilots, are they UAVs, are they manned, or anything combination in between. I'm certainly not prepared to go there at this point. I think it's too premature. I think we need more data.
We're getting down there. I was invited to the first NASA Techno-Signatures workshop in Houston in October 2018. The SETI folks are not on board with looking for UFOs, despite efforts to locate alien artifacts on the moon and asteroids. How can we get SETI and NASA on board?
So let me respectfully agree to disagree on one note, to say that there's alien artifacts on the moon and Mars. I'm not convinced of that. I understand people feel that way, and I respect their feelings, but I haven't seen any empirical data to substantiate that, other than a couple folks, on a couple sites saying that. So I haven't seen anything through government channels to substantiate that. But to the bigger note, as far as what SETI is doing, SETI has a mission, and they're using the tools that they have to do their mission. I don't, like I said, I think it's a three-prong approach. If you're going to try to, if you want to try to catch a butterfly or a fly with chopsticks, it might be kind of tough, right? But then again, if you're trying to catch something else, a mouse, maybe it works. So I think there is use for SETI. I think it's a great mission. I'm a little disappointed that when we came out, they were viscerally opposed to what we were trying to do, because at the end of the day, we're doing the exact same thing they are. We're using the scientific approach with the means and capabilities that we have to look at something that we don't understand. With, by the way, a hell of a lot more evidence. There's no speculation on this. This is real. It's there. I mean, we got it. So the question is, what it is, we don't know, but it is there. I mean, we're beyond that. That horse has left the gate. It's gone. So why would people be opposed to trying to figure that out? I don't know. Other than maybe we're getting into their rice bowls. But I think I think SETI's mission is a real mission, and I think it's warranted, and I think we should spend money on it. If you ask me personally, I think it's a good mission.
These are like, okay, so can you talk about the directed energy weapon capabilities of the U.S. government and whether they're being used on U.S. citizens? Well,
I can't address that, but I can tell you most certainly they're not being used on U.S. citizens. Folks, I hate to disappoint you. That is absolutely not occurring.
That's great news.
So you can rest easy. They're not using directed energy weapons at you. But that's all I can say about that.
are you aware of any geoengineering programs? Has anyone been able to translate symbols that may be an extraterrestrial language?
I don't have the expertise to answer that. That wasn't our focus.
What, in your opinion, is the best way to sift and sort through mountains of hoaxes and mistakes to find truly inexplicable AAP data?
Data, data, data. Put everything in, even junk. If you make the sausage machine good enough, all the junk will get thrown out. That's why you have AI. That's why we're building our Vault, our virtual analytic UAP learning tool, and that's why we have the Atom project. It is a very, very expensive effort. It is not cheap. But if you do it right, the analytics will sift through everything and hopefully separate the chaff from the wheat. And so that is why we are endeavoring on that effort, because we believe it's important enough. So how do you do that? Well, you hire the best of the best from places like Google and Sony to come out and help you with the AI. And that AI will be able to identify patterns that us as human beings aren't able to do. And that's going to be fielded. That's going to be something you're going to be able to access from your computer, your iPhone. So this is going to be data you're going to be able to pull up anytime and do whatever the hell you want to do with it, which I think is fascinating. I think that's great. So that's something that we're trying to do. And again, to answer your question succinctly, I know I've been kind of yammering, but it's all about the algorithms that go on behind the scenes. And you have to teach the system how to recognize what is legitimate and what is not. And it's not going to be done on a singular basis. It has to be basically look at all the data and then come up with the necessary AI protocol to say, actually, that is something very significant or that is not. And you're not going to be able to do that until you have the complete picture. So again, data, data, data. Give it to me. I don't care if it's junk. I don't care. I want real. I want junk and everything in between, because we will sort it out.
Where did the material come from that you're talking about and you showed, and when can you discuss this?
It will be discussed very soon. Again, stay tuned. And by the way, this is not a cheap plug for the show. If you don't watch it, that's fine. It's just to let you know that all these questions that you're asking, we tried to anticipate 7 months ago, so that's what we built into this thing. We're not doing this show just to go out and have a bunch of pyrotechnics and say, wow, here is a cool show. This is not a UFO hunting show. That's not what this is. This is a docuseries. These are real people in uniform, active duty, telling you what's going on. And we address those questions. So you want to know? Watch it. And by the way, if you I'm not an actor. I tell you, I got a face like a cement truck. Nobody wants to see me on camera. I get it. But it just so happens that we're working with the right people that can give you the information you're looking for. So when you look at the show, look at it from the perspective that what I'm telling you here, this is your show. This is not our show. This is your show. This is the show that all those questions you've been asking from day one since all those articles came out, that's in the show. And stuff you've never heard about, never seen before, you're going to say, wow, holy smokes, I had no idea. And that's the purpose. And then that's going to get you to force Congress and ask questions, more questions. And so that's how this works.
We're getting down there, sir. I'm going to let you go here. Has the government program that created the software to track UAPs track the Puerto Rico 2013 UAP to a destination inside the island? Nope, can't answer. Okay. Has it been easier to get government to listen than the scientific community?
Yes and no. The government look, at the end of the day, if the government doesn't want to do anything with this, it's because we've made it a stigma. We've made it such a pain in their ass, excuse my language, that they don't want to deal with it until you tell them it's okay to deal with it. Once they you, Joe Public, tell them, we want you to look at this, then they will. And so that's what we're in the process of doing. And it's kind of a push-pull effort. So if you want them to look at it, you got to let them know it's okay to look at it. Because every time they look at it, what happens? People ridicule. The government's wasting money on AATIP, and they spent $22 million on 37 studies that didn't mean anything. Well, that's absolutely not true, but that's what happens. And so no wonder no government bureaucrat, GS 13, 14, or 15 wants to even address this, because it's radioactive, it's kryptonite, it's a career ender. So once Congress says you will look at this, and once you tell Congress this is your priority, then that stigma's gone. So it's not an easy question, because you're saying, does government or scientific community, which one is more repulsed by the topic? In some cases it's both, and in some cases it's neither. I mean, look at you all here. We've got a lot of scientists here, a lot. I mean, folks that have active jobs right now with DoD. So it's happening. At the same time, it's happening with government. So.
Could TTSA patent the processes or the processes observed in the UAP material? Then in that case, it might not be best to reveal the analysis results.
Sure, yeah, you're right. But the material that's not ours, that we are stewards of, is, again, not ours. So we're not going to patent something that doesn't belong to us. Some of these individuals have been very generous and patient with us, and have allowed us to analyze their material, allowed us to serve as stewards of their material, provided we provide that information back to them. But it is, at the end of the day, their material. So if you come up to me after the end of the show and say, hey Lou, I got something here I want you guys to look at, it's really interesting, that's your material, that's not ours. I can't go out and patent that thing. And in order for me to touch this thing, I need your permission, every step of the way. And then when you say, Lou, I want it back, there you go, all yours. So that's kind of our approach with TTSA. It's important that people can trust us. It's important that people know that we're honest brokers, and we're not just out there to try to exploit a situation.
What percent of AATIP's work was UFO related? What percent was roughly the program paperwork? And the Pentagon says it was looking for foreign aerospace advancements in the years to 30 to 50 years from now. Many people are claiming that AATIP was 100% a UFO program. Oh, sorry.
AATIP was a 100% UFO program, period. It's not looking at airplanes. So, I don't know what to tell you. You know, I think it's starting to come out now when you start looking at the list of studies that came out. But it was a UFO program. You can call it UAP, UAS, whatever you want to call it. Tomatoes, tomatoes. Ford Mercury. It was a UFO. But I couldn't be the one to say that. It had to be DIA, and so, or it had to be Senator Reid or some of these people that can say that. Again, it just can't be world according to Lou. It's not helpful. So as far as our time spent on it, when you were working AATIP, it was AATIP. It wasn't anything else but AATIP. But a lot of us also had other jobs too. So, I mean, in all fairness, it wasn't that it was AATIP 100% of the time, but when it was AATIP, it was 100% of the time, if that makes sense.
What is your greatest fear in your current pursuit?
My greatest fear. I have two kids, 2 daughters. They are the absolute greatest accomplishment of my life. I have dragged those kids around the world through some of the most horrific situations known to mankind. They were without their father for many, many years, all in the name of national security. My greatest fear is that by me doing this, there are negative repercussions that are going to affect my daughters. I know that I'm walking a very fine line every single day. I know if on one side, if I say one thing the wrong way, I go to jail. If I say something wrong the other way, I lose credibility. And all sorts of other alligators that want to eat me every moment of every day. And now that I've become more public, keeping in mind, I am very much a creature of the shadows. I've avoided the spotlight as much as possible, to the point where, for us, that's safety. I was informed not too long ago, some years ago, that I was added to an ISIS Al-Qaeda kill list because of my work. You know, the last time I did something like this, I had to wear body armor. I mean, that's a shame. I shouldn't have to live that way. But you know, I don't feel sorry for me. I made my own choices. I made the deliberate decision to do what I did. My concern is that by me coming out the way I am, this is going to have a negative impact. And I'm also afraid that if I do something wrong, it's going to set everything you're doing backwards. All this momentum that we're gaining, there could very quickly be a campaign to discredit people, and that happens. When the system really starts getting pressed, you start seeing the system push back, and it can get very ugly. And so far, I haven't had to really experience that very much. I've crossed some wires. Some people got a little upset with me the way I came out, but I haven't invoked the ire of anybody yet, and I hope I don't. But I am, make no mistake, I am prepared for it. If it happens, I understand full well what I did and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I'm very careful not to violate that trust with the U.S. government, and at the same time have the conversation with you.
Down to the last 5 things, 5 questions. Realistically, what is the first major technological advancement that we can expect to see, providing no obstacles get in the way?
Provided no obstacles, I'd say beamed energy propulsion and quantum communication.
What can you tell us about Medvedev's statement to Sky News in 2012 that he was given the folder on relations with aliens when he took office?
Not a clue.
You're doing well. Given the fact that this Earth appears to be the only inhabitable planet in the solar system, would ET spacecraft visitation be evidence that interstellar travel or warp drive, things like that, can be made practical?
Well, let's look at the definition of habitable. From our perspective, sure. But I will tell you from other perspectives, maybe not. Okay? We talk about the Goldilocks zone. But we know there are already on this planet extremophiles. We know there are bacteria that grow a mile below the Arctic ice in extreme pressures and darkness. We know that there's animals that live in the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench and Challenger Deep, living off of chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis, basically surviving off the chemicals from the black smokers down below. And environments that we could never survive in. So for us, we look and say, well, nothing could ever survive on those planets. Those are extreme environments. Well, not if they're designed for it, not if they're adapted for it. You know, you take you go deep sea fishing and you catch some of these fish that live 2,000-3,000 feet below the surface. You bring them up and they don't survive more than a couple minutes because there's not enough pressure. For them, this is an extreme environment. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind. What we consider habitable and not habitable, that's relative. Because quite frankly, if I jump in a pond and I go more than 2 inches below the water, I'm not going to be in a habitable zone for very long. So, unless I have scuba gear. So I think that's relative. As far as any possibility that something from the outside would be coming in here, I don't want to speculate because I've said before, I don't know if it's from outer space, inner space, or the space in between. It could be anything. It might be from here. It might just be a completely different paradigm than we're used to, or ever even was aware of. Where the experience of space-time itself is fundamentally different. Where we live in a three-dimensional world, and we have a function of time as a fourth dimension. Is it conceivable that maybe there's a species that can live in that construct of 4 dimensions all the time? So what I mean, like in practical sense, instead of me being here right now with you, I could be here right now 5 minutes from now or 5 minutes ago. And I have that flexibility where time itself is a movable dimension. So I think there's lots of things that could be, and I don't want to speculate what could be because all we know is what is, and that is the data that we're collecting. So that's why I stay focused to the data. I really don't want to speculate because we don't really know.
Can you provide any information on which government agencies or departments to FOIA for data relating to AATIP, including any reports produced? And did you have any responsibility for allocating financial resources in regard to AATIP or OSAP, assuming financial resources were available?
Let me focus on the one question. As far as, I want to get this straight. Let me read this. Can you provide any information on which agencies? So on which agencies for the FOIA? If you look at Senator Reid's letter on the very last page, look at the very bottom page, and you're going to see FOIA exempt language. Okay, that's real. Now you can say, oh, that's sneaky, they shouldn't put it there, but we do, for a reason. Some of that stuff is FOIA exempt, and you're not going to see it. I don't know what to tell you. And it's FOIA exempt for a reason. And there's exceptions by law. There are, when you look at those exemptions, they actually go back to very, very specific things, loopholes, if you will, or circumstances that something is not FOIAble. Because of sensitivities, because of sources and methods, because all sorts of reasons. And so from that perspective, some of the frustration people, first of all, they thought it was advanced aviation, so you're not going to get anything. So, I mean, for the 6 months I was telling people, write aerospace. That's one thing. So you have to be very, very specific when you do a FOIA, and you also need to know which offices. So DIA, DOD's a big organization. So you might not get everything you want. It's not a magic bullet. You have to continue to keep pushing and digging and finding out what offices were around and what offices were not, and then maybe apply those specifically, those magic bullet FOIAs to those specific offices. OSAP was indeed the predecessor to AATIP. We've made that very clear from day one. Unfortunately, I can't talk much about it out of respect for my former colleagues. I won't do it. If you want to know more about OSAP and what they were doing, you're going to have to talk to the former director. Until he gives me permission to mention it, I can't do it. It's just out of respect for him. It's a promise I made him long, long ago. And just like I would want anyone speaking on my behalf, which apparently people do all the time, but that's ask me and I'll tell you. So with all due respect, I really can't answer too much about the OSAP piece.
Perhaps the most critical question of the entire evening. Who is your favorite NFL football team? This takes a while. This is going to be interesting.
I was going to say Detroit Tigers. I don't know anything about sports, guys. I'm an introvert. I know their baseball team. I really don't know, folks. I was never very coordinated. Look, I was a boxer. You don't have to be very coordinated to be a boxer. You just got to sit there and get hit. I was always the last kid picked on a football team or a baseball team. In fact, I was more of a liability than anything else. I wasn't particularly good at anything other than boxing and wrestling and stuff like that. So I wasn't much of a team player, unfortunately. So I kind of got in trouble for it. So I don't have a favorite team, but I am a Gemini. I like long walks on the beach and pina coladas.
I want to say thank you to you for going through a lot of questions. I mean, there's quite a few there. And you're persistent, and it's time for a drink. But anyway, it is 9:30, folks. I need to get you in sleep, and we're going to be up early. But let's all give a huge round of appreciation to this gentleman right here. Thank you.